Doug, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Great to meet you.
Join us, tell us a little bit about the early days of the business, Agworld, and how it started, and a little bit about the journey.
Yep. The Agworld came out of a conversation about how do you get the right information to agronomists and farmers for decision making. And I could see on my wife's family's farm, they're good farmers and all of that, but they at the time, going back to 2008, were working as many people on spreadsheets, bits of paper, and you did your plan with the bank and the agronomist rolled up, put it in the drawer and went out and did what you did. That never made sense to me. I saw the margins in farming and I thought there's got to be a more efficient way. And so between myself and another guy, Chris Ramsey, and eventually Matt Powell, who was the developer, we teamed up to build Agworld, and we started with these digital pens, which was a good workflow. You know, farmers were using a pen, so why not film what they're writing and turn it into text and report on that. And then the iPad came out and we built our first online, offline native iOS app for Australia. And we were the first using cloud in ag as a SaaS software business. So we sort of became educators of the market because all of that was new. And it sort of went from there really. And the iPad eventually overtook the digital pen, of course. There were no extra steps needed with the iPad. It was live data. Right? Whereas with the pen, there was an extra step. And wherever there's an extra step, people don't want to do an extra step, do they? So
Well, if you can remove any friction as you go, I guess the better.
Yeah. So the goal was really, we wanted to contribute to agriculture, make a difference to farming families in managing risk and reward. And I guess for me, I wanted to try my hand at business and with the entrepreneurial thing that's inside of me and see if I could make a go of it. And we did, and we gave it our best shot.
And when it comes to getting your first customers as you go along, how difficult was that getting farmers to adopt this new technology in the early days?
There's always a group in the industry, I guess, that are thinking ahead. Their thinking might have been driven by perhaps, how do I hand over 40 years of knowledge in my head digitally, perhaps to my son who likes digital stuff, or how do I just get that information across? And how do I give him the data to manage the risk of a multi-million-dollar enterprise? So there's a group of people that will adopt that.
Yep.
And there's a whole lot of people that will say, yeah, I know I'm going to have to do this at some point, but I'm not ready now. And that went on for quite a while, but slowly those numbers came. We were fortunate that through my contacts and Chris's contacts in ag, that we knew a whole range of farmers and agronomists across Australia that were prepared to back us. And I think that's part of our success is people were prepared to have a go with us. And so we got some early adopting customers and people who are willing to come along for the vision and mission and ride, and the roller coaster ride. And that they stuck with us through the whole journey, even till today. So getting the early customers wasn't hard. Getting the masses, that's another story. They call that crossing the chasm, I guess, but that just takes time, self-belief and continual plodding.
What was the hardest part of that particular phase? Because like you say, you often, I would have probably thought that it might be harder in the early stages trying to get people, but like you say, farmers can be extremely innovative and forward-looking with some of this sort of stuff, while they can also be stuck in their ways in other ways. But that, my experience, you look at any gadgets they'll put together on the farm or whatever it might be, they are very clever with looking ahead how to solve problems, right?
Yeah.
So how did you go when you went to go, say, scale up? What was hard about that?
If you take something like auto steer, which sort of came out of Australia on the East Coast and used globally now, farmers can see immediately that is an efficiency gain across the property and the enterprise. And when you see SaaS businesses that do software and it's an arduous back office thing, that is quite challenging. But as tech moves and as time moves and margins and things become tougher, that's where you see people get down to the detail. And I think Australian farmers they're actually very good on detail, whether it's in their head or they document it. They're pretty good at innovating and adopting things that they know or have a sense that will make the difference. So to scale, it's always challenging. The VCs that had invested in us, they thought ag would move really quite fast. But the strength of ag is that they're slow to change. And the other thing is they are also open to change. And those two things go hand in hand. So scaling up just took patience. It took service of the clients and listening to what they were saying and listening to what they're not saying and finding that balance and trying not to run out of cash, of course, as you go along. And that's the challenge with technology, is that it requires a lot of cash, a lot of burn before the people come and adopt. And that was probably the hardest bit, is balancing adoption versus cash flow. Right?
Yeah. And as part of that, just along the lines of, it might all make complete sense, especially when VCs look at things, they'll go, yeah, this is a no-brainer. But then when it comes to the customer, they might be a little bit more reserved around, well, we don't necessarily have to be the first ones. Let's see how you prove yourself over the next couple of years, because we're in no rush, but if it works, great.
Yeah.
Slower uptake is there.
Yeah, we've experienced a lot of that. And I would say, look, the first 7 years of Agworld, it was very much like that. But in the last 6, it's progressively, and in particular the last 4, it's progressively got better, and we're more of a household name, and certainly the largest in the country. And people are using the product more aggressively and more appropriately for their business as we've improved the product. So VCs that entered the market of ag probably thought that it would be like the financial market or the consumer market, be quite quick to take off. But it's an ultra marathon in ag, and it's about people. And it's a little bit different. A few of them have been crying in their beers, I'm sure, over some of the poorer investments or the investments they thought would take off. It seemed like a good, but you have to be up there. You have to be front of mind. I mean, there's 100 different things you're thinking of on a farm or at any business, but if you're 50 down the list, it might be a good idea, but it's not the priority. And you've got to become the priority. And I think that's where I would say the ag tech industry in Australia, there's a lot of really good ideas, but are they the top 5 things? Are they changing the farming enterprise for the better, for the future? Really? Can you
move up that list of priorities for the farmers to actually make a decision, because otherwise they don't have time.
Yeah, and that list doesn't stay the same, because as tech improves certain things, that one goes off the list. It's under control. The next one moves up. And that's the challenge with the adoption side of it, right? So
interesting. But in terms of the VCs and when you went through that process, how long after you started the business? 2009, I think you started the business. Yeah. How long after you started did you start to look at the VC investment, and what was your thought process around that?
Naive. Well, I think we bootstrapped it from late 2008 through to the end of September 2010. We took a bit of seed funding from a farmer that could really see what we're doing, and we just backed it ourselves till then, and we got a capital in and the team there, and they were very good and hands-on. And so we had a pretty good experience with them as a Series A. Yeah. But you then learn what's in the term sheet. What does it mean?
Yeah.
There's
all sorts of detail in there that until it becomes apparent that you've got to cross a particular bridge, you didn't realize that particular clause came into effect, right?
Yep. It's the nature of the beast. So I learned a lot from those VCs. Sometimes a hard way, sometimes a good way, but ultimately you learn and you take it on board and you keep moving forward. So we raised well on the first one in September. It was a decent raise. It's probably the biggest out of Perth at the time, and it was a VC out of Perth. Yep. And the second one was a global strategic out of Europe. And again, that was the biggest in Australia in ag tech at the time. And Australia is just a small market, really. So getting funding has always been a challenge for lots of people to get global. And on the third one, we went global as well, out of the UK, for a good investor as well.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think this is public knowledge. Tell me if it's not, but from what I've seen, it was a successful $100 million plus exit a couple of years ago to a Canadian business, I think.
Yep. Yeah, to Semios. Yep.
And how was that process? What was it that got you to that point and go, this is best thing for us to do going, for the business and for yourself going forward,
We decided in 2017, 18 that we were going to do the hedgehog approach in more diligent style that Jim Collins describes.
Yeah, no, I know it well.
And I really felt we were not going to take any more investment after our Series D. The board had decided that, and that we were going to get our money from our customers. In other words, we're going to prove the business to be profitable. But then during that time, of course, all the VCs have their own clock and time on their fund, and some wanted to move out, some had different interests. So there's a whole lot of things change over 10 years. Yep. And that's okay, but then you've got to address that. So we were approached as we were thinking about our strategic investment. We had Macquarie Bank working on what we would do. How would we either bolster the platform? Do you IPO or what do you do? How do you go about it? Do you do some sort of mezzanine round and get a bit of a change in the cap table and so forth? But we ended up having a strategic, like I said, Mouse come and talk to us, and that it was about a year and 11 days from memory, all of that.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah. Sounds pretty accurate.
yeah, it was all on Zoom.
Pretty specific. Yeah. Well, it would have been, I guess, back then, right?
Yeah, it was all through COVID. And we never met each other until after COVID. But it was a diligent process, and they're a good company for us to partner with. And so it was really about how do you address your cap table and how do you get more funding because the goal is not sell the business or flip the business as such. Well, that was never my goal. Mine was what's the legacy you leave in ag? How do you put something in and make sure it keeps going? And we really all felt that Semioss, I do feel that Semioss are the company to do that with. So that was the approach.
If you go back in time to when you first started the business and you look at how it sort of progressed, is that what you expected, or is that beyond expectations, or what were you thinking when you very first started the business?
What it could be in terms of the things that the product does was probably 50% in the mix, but the other 50 developed as we went along. And that were about meeting the market and getting the product market fit without pivoting and changing with new course. I think what I thought was that it cost about $1 million to build, and it cost us over 50 to build it. Right. Over that period of time of reinvesting funds in 20 odd million of capital that we raised over the period. I thought we could build a business worth around 50 million. That was in our business plan. And the fact that it sold for more than that, great, from that perspective. But what I did say is this thing has value, and this thing is a actual real business. And I think that was, to me, that's what it said to me. I know there's other companies that have sold for 300 million and then folded and disappeared. There's a whole range of reasons for that. My drive is that Agworld with Semioss won't be one of those, because they're very hand in glove in their fit rather than a competitive acquisition. So good from that perspective. So it definitely exceeded expectations. I think the thing I enjoyed the most, and I always have enjoyed, is building a business with a great business culture and the people. Building a high performing team of really good people that are bought into the vision. That's always been a priority for me. It's a passion, I guess, in amongst what we do. So,
what was your background before you started the business in terms of you're looking at the high performing teams and all that sort of stuff? What was your experience and in business itself before that?
Because I started out as an apprentice mechanic, so I left school when I was 15. So it was kind of, it's been a long list of things that I did, but essentially I found myself in ag, I got a break through a friend of mine that worked for New Farm, joined one of the chemical companies, which was Agworld at the time. And they sent me to uni, which I desperately needed, and got us to do agronomy and stuff like that, and ag science. So that sort of background really helped. But I think the real being on the front line, having been and sown crops and harvest crops and shorn sheep and all classy, and having a good rounded experience of farming and being passionate about that was a thing that set it in place. My thing is that I'm very process driven. And when I solve problems, I like a process around it. I might not design that exact process, but I know what a good process looks like. So, and what efficiency. I'm lazy. I don't want to have to do it 15 times. So I want to template.
It's just practical, isn't it?
Yeah. I want to template it and scale it, make it work. So I guess that's kind of the background for it. And the rest is just surrounding yourself with really smart people and realizing that you can learn. We can learn from anyone. It doesn't matter what their station is in life. That is the most important thing. But secondly, is where you're weak, like in my case, it'd be detailed finance. That's not my, I surround myself with an analyst and good accounting people, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to say I don't even know what that means. But over time you learn that, right? So
yeah. But that's critical, right? To be able to say, I don't know what that means, and not try and just fudge your way through or whatever. You just got to be open and honest, and that's the quickest way to learn as well.
Yeah, and I enjoy it, and I think it's empowering to those around you that they get to teach you and all of that. And I think we kept a very flat structure and an open door as a CEO. I never really liked titles, so it's just I'm Doug, over in that corner. So if you want to talk about stuff, and we always that very open policy, and I think that was pretty cool, and just not cool to be for cool's sake, but it was cool because people really enjoy that. Just that
it
one
resonates with people, right?
Yeah, that's been really good in the journey.
What would you say your biggest strength was as a leader as you're going through that whole process from the start till now?
I'm a bit of an all rounder, but like I said, when I look at the core thing that I do, it's people focused. It's driving change. When you're delivering stuff, you need good people. And I think my strength is serving people as a leader, serving them to get them to where they want to go in their job, but also to get the job done and empowering them. So for me, I think that's kind of the secret sauce of Agworld, because once they see you're sincere and authentic in what you're doing, they see that you're obviously passionate and believe in the vision, and they too engage, right? So I think that's probably the strength for me.
Was there anything that surprised you over the course of that sort of 10-year plus journey? Anything that really sort of surprised you in terms of what you came up against?
Ignorantly, I thought the US market would be pretty easy to get into, but I've since learned that is just not true. And that really surprised me because we all speak English, but actually it's not the same English. It's not the same culture. And the conversations you have as an Australian, you think it's gone good, or sometimes you're a bit direct and it doesn't go very well because they're not a very direct people. So the differences in culture there really surprised me in getting into that market and really understanding it. But again, it's a learning thing, right? And that I enjoy. I don't think that was the enjoying part, but it was surprising to me that, surely they just see that this is how it works, but.
I would have thought the same sort of thing, but if the culture's that different, and you understand, I think probably with other cultures where they're much more different. Yeah. But the American culture, I would have thought would be quite similar in terms of farming, but obviously not necessarily the case.
No, it's a very different market, different thing. I mean, they have the similar crops or same crops or whatever, but their approach is very different, and the environment that they work in is very different. And you've got to go in and really respect that and respect their culture and try and understand it rather than think, well, this is just silly, But
you're not going to change their minds on the big picture and how they are you? It's about adapting and solving that puzzle.
Yeah, so you got to build the same cultural business across your global business internally, but you've got to address two different cultural markets, or in the case of Australia, and the US, you got to address that, and so you've got to build a US team, right? And you can't just put Australians in there. So that's been good because we've ended up with a fantastic group of people. So, and they would have the Canadians as well, and so forth, that we work with. So
would understanding that before you sort of entered those markets would have changed how you would have not approached, because obviously you would have changed your approach, but would it have changed which market you went to next, or was it the US is a big market, you got to be there?
Yeah, look, no one wants to go and harpoon Moby Dick, right, in a rowboat, and I think that's what we were doing, right?
Yeah, right.
I think, and that's really what the US is. Australia is just a much smaller fish. It would have been nice and safe and comparatively calmer waters because we're familiar with them and we know what to expect. And I think I would have thought a bit differently going into the US than we did. But again, it's about adapting and learning. So so that's what we did.
Sometimes that naivety is a blessing in disguise because you might not have tackled it otherwise, and not knowing helps you get on with it. You have no choice because you're in so far, right?
Yeah, that's right. Look, it's just a white knuckle ride, and you're going to be up for it. That's okay. Yeah, that's not to say you don't have some serious stress at times, but like I say, there's a balance. I think that hedgehog thing is a very cool thing to have in your business. That forced us to really understand, is our economic engine the same in the US as it is in Australia? What can we be the best in the world at? Is that going to be the same in Australia as the US? So it takes thinking. So,
and it creates that sort of philosophy around the hedgehog. I think it also makes you automatically more patient in the right ways.
Yep.
Because you're there for the long haul. It's not let's try and get this done. I mean, there's elements, obviously you're going to move fast with various parts of the business, but you just got to, bear down and keep on going. And that patience, I think, is what you get from that type of philosophy as well.
Yep. And you got to balance, your investor patience and and what they're saying. You got to balance that while you're balancing your customers and your internal and external customers. So quite a challenge, but that's part of business, right?
Yeah. And I guess that's not something many people would think about until you're right in the middle of it, because it's not something you probably anticipate. Those different interests within the group, stakeholders, then got to manage. Each of them have their own quite different timelines perhaps as well. And you've got to look after all of them because they're all important.
Yep.
Yeah. How hard is that?
It's really hard. I think you just got to be honest, but I think what you've got to really do is you've got to keep saying, this is what you invested in. This, I know this is going to work. I know, I believe in the vision and mission, and you've got to remain and hold the course. And because immediately you pivot for the sake of appeasing or popularity or just self-doubt, you lose so much momentum. It costs you a bazillion in energy and cash. The way I managed it was to hold the course and dial down and keep showing incremental success. And that is success. Success is not A to Z. It's A, B, C, D. It's incremental. So that's kind of what you got to get across to them. And once they start seeing that, that's kind of helps a lot.
Okay, how much would you put that down though to communication? And how much of that is conviction? Like your conviction in this is how we've got to go, hold the course. And how much of that, managing those issues is how you communicate it to them versus, displaying that, no. Could it be easy enough to go, yeah, let's do this and get this short win and everyone's happy type of thing. But if you know it's not in the long-term best interest, that's where your conviction comes in, right? So what balance is it between conviction in what you believe is the best versus communicating that with people?
Look, I think conviction plays the majority in it because actions, as I say, kind of speak louder than words, and that conviction will come out in action. Finessing your communication, which is something that's probably an area I'm not that awesome at, being a diplomat. Takes a bit of work, so you have to, perhaps like me, get a bit of a coach on that. But yeah, I think that's probably 30% of it on the comms side. But investors back the horse. They want to know that the horse they backed is passionate about what they do, has a level of conviction, and will get in there every day and fight for that. But you got to communicate, and there's a balance in that. So yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah. Okay. What was the best decision you ever made along that way?
One best decision. I think there were many decisions I made, but I think getting a coach, being open to being coached, was a good thing. And I sort of started that at a personal level in 2000, but I really ramped it up in about 2012.
Right.
And that was really about what you're talking about conviction, but a lack of diplomacy or communication skills or how best to communicate that to sophisticated investors and so forth. So I think that was a good decision, and that kind of unpacks your what I would class as your natural gifting, and then honing other things as well that you may have to learn. So I think that has made me more effective with people and understanding, that passion and vocation. Perhaps they connect for some people and perhaps they don't for others. And so, working through all of that sort of stuff has been, that was probably a good decision to unlock your potential.
I find that really interesting, the communication part and getting coaching on it, because there's probably not a lot of people that necessarily would go and do that because, one, you've got to recognize that it's worth doing, whereas often you meet people who, I don't know, this is my own observation in business and in life, there's people who think they can communicate, but they're half the time just bullshitting. Then there's the other half who are very blunt and straightforward, but don't see anything ever wrong with it. And not that there necessarily is. I mean, plenty of people I know who are very close to me are very blunt and they're great. But there's somewhere in between, sometimes there's a little bit of nuance that can go a long way to just managing a situation in the way it needs to be for a certain situation. And I guess that's what you were looking for.
That's very much what I was looking for. And I had one coach that had been on many boards and been a group CEO, and he's just fantastic for that side of it. And then another guy that, runs a business doing that. So not locked into one person, but for different purposes and tasks. And I think that's really, really important.
Is there an example where that sort of coaching came to the fore for you, where you sort of, or something where you looked at and thought, this has actually had an impact on what I do?
The guy that was the group CEO that helped us when we were doing the deal and talking about what are people because everybody wants their own type of terms, and you've got your internal investors and then you've got the people acquiring, and somewhere in between that, you've got to actually get some harmony. And I think that coaching there on how to communicate certain things, what they're looking for, what they're really saying when they say that.
Yep.
Understanding transfer of risk. People always want to transfer risk one way. I've always felt that we should always do things fair and reasonable, always trying to deal with people that see it that way. But when it gets into money and final transactions, well, some of that goes out the window. So finding some good communication skills around how to manage that was helpful. And that guy was very good at doing that for me.
Okay, that's interesting. What about one of the bigger challenges you had to overcome along the way? Anything that comes to mind that was particularly difficult?
Look, I think the US is and was a big challenge for us. But when I think of managing those VCs and their shareholders while going into such a huge market like the US, under-resourced in terms of cash and people, and such a long burn, that was really difficult to explain why we did that. Because I can see the opportunity.
Yep.
It's like I can see the fish, but I can't catch them.
Yep.
Only if you give me some more bait and maybe a smaller hook or a bigger hook, or, it's like finding one, and it's quite challenging. So I think that for me, that was the challenge there, is doing those things, holding the course and keeping your team focused. That's the challenge, I think. But once the honeymoon period is over with investors, you've got to manage all of that. And that's not painting a black picture. You've got to be a good steward of their money. You took it on certain terms and you need to honour that. So, but at the same time, you need to do the business.
It's a real life conundrum, right? And until you're in the middle of it, people don't understand it. And you learn that on the job type of thing in the middle of running the business. You can see all the theory of it, but until you actually experience it, it's hard to understand, I guess.
Yeah.
What about the best advice you were ever given in terms of business advice or life advice that anyone's ever said to you that you thought that really makes sense?
I've thought about that from time to time. Like, I think our family members, I've got some reasonably successful people in my family across the wider group, and there's a couple of things that I put together that I think have been helpful for me is, when you're doing business, you forget the emotion and hype in the idea and just make sure the numbers add up. Don't do it if they don't add up, right? That seems pretty straightforward, but a lot of people rush ahead with the emotion ideas and do the numbers later.
Yeah.
And then I think, as I said earlier, people always try and transfer risk. And so always try and deal with people who understand what fair and reasonable is and demonstrate that that's what they're prepared to do with you. They're the customers you want. They're the people you want to work with that are fair and reasonable. And it's never going to be a perfect world, but that's better than the extreme opposite of that, right? Which is unfair and reasonable. So,
there's some people that as you go through life and business, you start to realize that early on in the relationship that you don't necessarily better off being in business with these people, because it's actually not worth the pain that you're going to go through, because you know the personality type.
Yep.
And I'm probably a bit similar to you. If there's a negotiation of some sort, I'll look at it from my point of view, their point of view, and I look at it and go, well, if it was 5 and you wanted 10 and 7.5 is about right. Let's be fair. And as soon as you say 7.5, they go, well, they're now at 7.5 and you're at 5 still. And so now it's 6 or whatever it is. Some people just aren't rational and reasonable, right? And all fair. And I think recognizing that and not becoming cynical about it is probably pretty important, just to be like, some people are just like that. You're just best off moving to the side and then probably not dealing with them half the time.
That can be like, we came across a deal which really in the early days would have made a big difference, but it would have changed the way we did our business. It would have probably changed the product. It would have really made us slaves to it. And so we walked away from it. And people were like, I can't believe you walked away from it. But it was the best thing we chose to do at the time.
No doubt it wasn't easy to do either. But when you know sometimes you just know in your heart that that's not the right thing, because it's going to cause more problems than it's worth.
Well, you ignore your gut at your own peril. So that was kind of a good example of it, I suppose.
All right. I've got 4 fast questions to finish with. Doug, business person that inspires you and why, or business people?
I probably don't have any specific person, but I look for authentic leaders, I suppose. People who I look around the world and I think about leaders and their challenges and style. I think leadership is lonely, tough, rewarding, can be soul destroying, but it can be takes a certain type of person in each situation to be a leader. And I think of President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Ukraine, actor, comedian, politician. Look at the challenge he has every single day with the nation in a David and Goliath battle. Look at his leadership style. I'm not saying he's perfect, but look at his doing. He continues every day to serve his people under immense pressure, to inspire, to be strategic, but to be diplomatic, to get things out, to keep his team in check. Not saying he's perfect, but that's pretty inspirational stuff to come from that background and do what he's doing. Yeah.
And the biggest of challenges, right? Like it doesn't get any more difficult than that. I mean, whatever else anyone's doing in your life, you think about then, what if you had to do that tomorrow?
Yeah.
It'd be pretty overwhelming, right? Like, it's incredible. What about business books? Do you look at those sorts of things? I
do. I'm Scaling Up was one that I read, and good to great, and just
great, brilliant.
Good to great's probably, as I said, I mentioned. I think that hedgehog thing really solved it for me, because you get distracted by the foxes run around, and Colin says that they'll have many goals but achieve less. But hedgehogs, they kind of simplify the process and focus on a single overarching vision, and that. So I think that's probably the book for me that I refer back to, and the Scaling Up book. They're probably the two that we at Agworld and even in Semios took in, and it was amazing. Both companies were reading both those books at those.
Oh, really?
Interesting to see how each company thought about those and what interested them. And that's a leadership thing as well, what resonates as it does with humans. So I think that was really interesting, but it put us in good stead to scale the businesses. So
I find that fascinating, the hedgehog part, whereas as soon as people look at that and realize that that's something that really they resonate with, it tells you something about their authenticity, I think, in terms of how they want to approach business, because that could have aligned with intent.
Yep.
And, it's probably not perfect, but that's how I see it. When you see people talking about that, it's like, okay, that tells you what their real goals are, because that's some kind of underlying philosophy that really matters.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you have to have a deep understanding of those things that you're deeply passionate about, what you're going to be best in the world about, and what drives your economic or your resource engine or whatever it is. You've got to be deep into that, and you've got to be authentic about it, because if you're not, it's not going to work. So, I think that's what I liked about that book.
Do you have any favorite quotes on business or life or anything along those lines?
Mine comes from the family. Just back yourself, surround yourself with smart people, but just remember you can learn from everybody, no matter what their station is in life. That's really, I just keep that in mind all the time. Meet people where they are. That's part of the servant leadership model, I suppose.
Yeah, that's pretty wise stuff. And what's next for you and for the business in the years ahead?
I'm certainly not one who will retire. I don't think that's in me, but I am having a bit of a break and not rushing into things. I remain a shareholder in Semios, and that's a good thing. I do some consulting to them still. I do think the sale to them was a good thing, and I think we'll see, the synergies of those businesses and teams surface in the market to be something significantly helpful to the ag sector. In the meantime, I'll continue doing that consulting with them and to other business owners out there, investors who want to scale businesses or need people coached or whatever it is. If it's problems, you'll probably see me there.
That's good. Doug, thanks very much for your time and insights. Fascinating. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks very much for having us down.